everyone. I'm Darian Worden. I'm an individualist anarchist. I have a website, darianworden.com. You can read the spelling of my name over here. I've written a novella called Bring a Gun to School Day about how it's a fictional book about a major school shooting and how that affects this teenager who's kind of on the edge of society. I also do a live podcast with Bile and Tennyson, who's around here somewhere. And I write at the Center for a Stateless Society. I have a compilation of some Center for a Stateless Society pieces over there, Make Liberty. I also have a couple of issues of Alliance magazine that I've been published in, as well as a little bit about libertarian left and my books over there. Books are $10, the rest of the stuff's free. And I'm talking today about why libertarians are left, or the relationship with that. And I want to start out by saying that I didn't start out being thinking I want to be libertarian left. It's just in my efforts to be the most consistent advocate for the maximum amount of individual liberty possible, limited only by the liberty of other people. I found that a left mindset was really helpful and consistent with that. And I don't want to say that you have to think of yourself as left. I just feel like this is the most accurate, the most productive way to do things. And that it doesn't mean that we should limit ourselves to looking to people who consider themselves left or anything like that. So I'm going to run through some history, then I'm going to talk about current things, then I'm going to talk about how to interact with the right and with the left. So I'll get started here. Bile's doing a film of this, should be on YouTube, probably Liberty Activism, my website as well, probably other places too. And I'm going to start by running through some history. If you want to read more about this, Murray Rothbard's Left and Right is Good, as well as Roderick Long's follow-up piece, Left and Right 40 Years Later, which was written 40 years after Rothbard wrote, coincidentally, and gets into a little bit of this. The terms left and right in politics really originate from the French National Assembly following the overthrow of the monarchy. And to the right of the assembly was conservatives, reactionaries. They wanted to restore the monarchy, or at least limit the growth of individual freedom that the left, as the radicals, represented. And on the left sat the famous free marketeer Frederick Bastiat. I might be pronouncing his name wrong, but that's just how we're going to do things here. And he sat next to Proudhon, the first person known to self-identify as an anarchist. These people were both on the left. They had different views. Proudhon's did change over time, as Sean Wilber will probably be happy to talk to you about if you ever come across him online or at Corvus Editions. And so this is how left and right started. This would be in the 1790s, and throughout the early 18th, throughout the 18th, early 19th century, that's how it was. Liberals were people who were what we might call classical liberals or radicals. They were people like Thomas Hodgkin, Herbert Spencer, who were for as much freedom as possible, and they saw this as consistent with raising the general level of equality in society and just generally improving living conditions for the poor. And then from them, I already mentioned Proudhon, but there's also Molinari and Bellegarde, and they were more what might be considered today market anarchists. They talked about anarchy as statelessness, as market forces taking over for what the state did. Bellegarde is known for the statement, "Anarchy is order, whereas government is civil war," and there, you can read a little bit about them online. The Molinari Institute, which is the kind of parent organization of Center for a Stateless Society, is it Molinari Institute or Molinari Society?
Institute. There's also society, but it has different properties.
Okay. All right. Well, Molinari is the namesake for that. So that's where he comes in, and that would be mid 19th century when he was writing, as well as Bellingerie. And then we come to, I want to touch on the concept of libertarian socialism. In recent years, you might say, like libertarian socialism doesn't even make sense, but libertarian means looking towards individual liberty and away from the state. So people who wanted to kind of level things, who wanted more equality in society, but didn't want to force it on people, they recognized that just breaking up the monopolies that government created and breaking up government created privilege, and the inheritance of privilege from the last centuries would be the way forward, the way for socialism as the mine to the miner, the factory to the worker. Everybody, things are worker owned, they're not owned by somebody else. And I think when we look at the way this developed differently in America than in Europe, I don't want to minimize the amount of oppression of both Native Americans and blacks in early America, but I think there was a sense that property was something that a regular person could have as a bulwark against the state, more so than in Europe, where people who had lots of property they generally got it from royal privilege going back hundreds of years. So when you hear about, for example, in the Spanish Civil War, people taking over large farms, it's not somebody who got there by just providing services that other people wanted that it allowed them to build up wealth. It's people who were privileged through authoritarian means going back many years, whereas in America you had land grants, you had land speculation, you had handouts to the railroads, but there was still, and you had people getting pushed off their land or forced to work land. But considering the rest of the world at the time, you have like land, individually owned property could be a little bit different in terms of the libertarian orientation. So you see people like Owen and Warren who would create these kind of utopian places that were anti-state. They generally, people back then went on the labor theory of value, which has fallen out of favor. Kevin Carson's kind of tried to rework it in a subjectivist manner, if you're interested in that whole thing. I'm sure Bio will be happy to talk to you about various types of economics here. And so they had these utopian kind of socialist, but also based on kind of individual productivity, where not everything is owned by the collective arrangements. And then you go on to like Tucker, who did the journal Liberty, and you had in Europe, in Russia, you had Kropotkin, who wrote Mutual Aid. And from what I've read, which isn't a whole lot on their relationship, Tucker and Kropotkin were not really, they didn't really regard each other as highly as I might regard both of them. But I think they're both worth reading and looking at. And then moving on a little bit, I just want to rush through some of this. When you get to the Russian Revolution, you have anarchists who are against both the Tsar and the communists, and they're trying to carve out big areas of liberty. You have not just with Nestor Makhno in Ukraine, but you have a lot of collectives within actually Russia proper and the other satellite areas. You have the left was against World War I. There's an old Industrial Workers of the World poster. You might object to the sexist language in it, but it says, "Be a man, not a soldier." And this was, they're kind of involved in recruiting against the war. This idea that this was a war where the ownership class was pitting workers against each other, and workers were going to kill each other, and then the profiteers would profit off that. And that was the main thing in World War I resistance. Then you have resistance to fascism as well as state communism, and the Spanish Civil War, for instance. And then there were anarchist partisans all over fascist-occupied Europe. Of course, you had that in Asia as well. And then when we get up to the 1960s, you have